Good evening. Welcome to this evening's program of the Commonwealth Club of California. My name is Gerald Harris. I am chair of the club's Technology and Society Member-led Forum and a member of its Board of Governors. And I will be your host for this evening's program. I also want to welcome the people who are observing this program through our various digital channels, as well as you here in the audience. Thank you for coming and revisiting the club. On behalf of the club, I would also like to thank the folks at Wonderfest for their support of today's program in particular, and also a thank you to the Good Lit program supported by the wonderful folks at the Bernard Osher Foundation. Please silence your phones and other noise-making devices at this time. And now to our speaker, Serafina El Badri Nance. Serafina is a astrophysicist, analog astronaut, author of Starstruck, a memoir of astrophysics and finding light in the dark. Please join me in welcoming Serafina. Thank you so much for coming. And as I mentioned to you, this is about your book, so I want you to talk about it in the way that you want to. But maybe a good place to start with is to just let us, what's your background, the way you explain it, and why you decided to write this wonderful book. I enjoyed reading it.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here. It is really surreal, and I feel very, very grateful. So I fell in love with the stars when I was 5 years old. I used to stargaze every night with my dad. And even at that age, I think I always knew that I wanted to do something with the stars, whether it was becoming an astronomer or becoming an astronaut, something with space. And, that journey to grad school has been really beautiful in a lot of ways. I think I've learned some really incredible things about the way that our universe works. And I think it's also been really difficult. I think, I wasn't inherently good at math and science. I always felt out of place as a woman, as an Egyptian American, and as someone who, wasn't the best in the class at those subjects. And I think I reached a point in grad school where, I was tired of feeling so out of place. And I started sharing my story a little bit more online and, being more transparent about what it's like to actually pursue your dreams when there are obstacles in your way. And I think that's the honest, journey and story of what it means to, pursue the stars. And I wanted to share the heartbreak and the joy of it, because it's taken both to get here. Mm-hmm. And, my hope is that readers will find a sense of belonging in a way that I think I wished that I'd had when I was embarking on this journey.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let me just say, as I work my way through the book, you may say you're not good at math or whatever, but I thought there was a lot of good science in there.
Thank
right?
you.
I learned a lot from reading it, and so, and you talk about not only good science in the book, but then you weave in your personal stories we're moving through. Why did you decide to write it that way? And I thought it was very effective. Could you say something about that?
Thank you. Yeah. So for those who don't know, the format of the book is a little bit unique in that there's science, astronomy that bookends each chapter of my life. And so the book essentially traces the evolution of the universe in parallel with my personal evolution. And what I tried to do was find parallels in each astronomy subject matter, as there was in my life. And I think, that's a literary choice, a literary device, but there was also something, I think, profound about it in that scientists are human, and it's important that we share the humanness behind the science as well as the science itself.
Yeah.
And then you get to the whole idea of we are star stuff. We literally, are the calcium in our bones, the oxygen in our blood. We are the stuff of the universe. And so I thought that was an interesting parallel as well.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of my fun parts of your book is you have a way, and I guess you also see you're a science communicator, and you do a lot of that. And there was a part in the book where you tried to explain to people how many stars there are in the universe related to how many grains of sand there are on Earth. Can you run us through that so people get a sense
Oh,
of that?
man.
Yeah. I enjoy reading that part.
My advisor is in the audience. He can be like, that's wrong. Yeah, I think what I try to do in the science sections is choose analogies that make it, very accessible. And, what's interesting about astronomy is that it's out there. You can't touch it. You can't, taste it or smell it. It's inaccessible by virtue of what it is. And so we have to draw parallels to what we can understand here on Earth. And so I made this analogy of the number of stars of the universe and the grains of sand on Earth, and the fact that there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand here. And that there's something in there about the vastness of the universe and trying to understand just how enormous our cosmos is. And for me, that's something that I think draws me back to astronomy every day. I like thinking about how small we are and how big it is out there.
I really felt small after reading it.
Hopefully that's a good thing.
Okay, my life doesn't matter because I'm just this little bitty thing here. It doesn't really matter. But let me just go into this a little bit more because I think there's so much good science. You also talk about the fact that of the stuff in this room, it's only like 5%. Matter is only 5%. There's other stuff out there like dark matter. Can you tell people, kind of walk us through that? Because I thought this is amazing stuff for people to understand. Yeah.
So I learned this when I was in 11th grade, which the fact that I'm about to tell you, and it hooked me. It was like I was so entranced by this notion that we only know 4 to 5% of everything in the universe. Everything else, dark energy and dark matter, we don't know what it is. We see its effects, we know it's there, but it's this sort of unseeable, in many ways, because of that unknowable stuff. And for a curious mind, for somebody who loves exploring, that's exciting. That's ripe with possibility.
Oh, I mean, completely. I mean, I remember I was going through a BART station once, and there was a sign about dark energy, right? And they wanted people to come to Berkeley to talk about it. And I thought, like, wow, this is really getting down to the public now about how important this is. So I thought, the things you're doing in this book is just sort of bring these points out. So let me ask you a question on this whole science thing, which is, as you educate people more about science, what is it that you hope might change in them or make the world better? I mean, we talk about climate change and all these kinds of things, but when people understand science better, can it make them a better person or what?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. There are two parts to my answer. The first is I think astronomy is the most magical thing in the universe, and I want to share that magic with everybody who I can talk to and reach. But more importantly, I think that science literacy is extraordinarily important to being a citizen of the world. We all experience these existential crises like climate change, the epidemic of gun violence, mental health crises, COVID-19.
People can't breathe in New York today,
exactly,
right?
That's right. Yeah. And I think it's what I have seen in doing science communication is that often people who maybe don't have the science literacy that, I would like, treat science as a belief, and it's a belief system, and then they can opt in or out. And, as someone with a background in science, that's incredibly frustrating. And I think that we as scientists need there's an importance and a need to communicate what we learn to the public, because we can't expect that people with non-science backgrounds would necessarily understand, what we're talking about. So I think personally that it's the job of every scientist to communicate in an accessible fashion what we learn with the world.
Well, I mean, just even at the club, we've had programs on gene editing. We've had programs on AI. We've had programs, I told you, on the James Webb Telescope, right? So we're totally in agreement with you in terms of people just need to, to learn more. And I think it is important for a diverse group of people to communicate.
Absolutely.
These stories. So one thing I'm going to jump down on one of my questions because my girlfriend really liked this question. So I'm going to tell you. What is your message to young women? She has 2 granddaughters. One of them is a little math whiz, by the way.
Love that.
And my question is it okay to be a girly girl and a scientist and an engineer?
Yes.
Okay. Does this work?
Yeah. I think we all grew up with stereotypes of what a scientist looks like. I certainly, that's part of the reason why I felt like I didn't belong, is because I don't present the same way that this image of a scientist is in my mind. And what I hope that young women take away from my book, or just in general, is that they can be their whole selves in science, whether that's being a girly girl, whether that's, I don't know, doing math all day. And it doesn't really matter. It's if there's a passion there, I hope that they can continue to foster that and fuel that. And I hope that they find a community and mentors that encourage that, because that's really where that's where I've been able to succeed and overcome obstacles, is because I've had incredible mentors, including my advisor in the audience, and my dad, and people who allow me to show up as my full self.
Right. In fact, I want you to talk about the experience I think you had with either your 6th grade teacher, Mr. Miken, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
Tell everybody that story. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Tell about that. Yeah.
So Miken was my 11th grade astronomy teacher, and he is this, I thought he was like 100 years old at the time, but he's this, he looks like a scientist. He's this wizened man. He is in an observatory. He has all of these books around, and you walk into the observatory and you feel like you're in another world. I mean, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And he taught his class so differently than all of the math and science classes that I had taken to date, because he approached science as being curious about the world and about the universe. And rather than seeking answers, whether it's, memorizing an answer or, understanding all the steps that get you to something, it was much more about posing the questions, getting people interested, fostering that curiosity, and letting everyone know that they could explore. And he brought up stories of him, walking the Grand Canyon and I don't know, doing things I didn't know were science. I was like, oh, you go out and look at the stars and then you talk about it? Cool. And I was enraptured. I mean, it was an entry point that I hadn't had before. I think before that, I was so wrapped up in getting the right answer.
Yes.
And what I learned in that class and, throughout my career so far is that it's just important to ask the right questions. And then, of course, gather evidence, analyze it, understand where it's pointing you to. But science isn't necessarily about, being right all the time.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, there's a quote in the book, and I may not have this exactly right, where I thought one of your sort of breakthrough points was this notion of, let me put it this way. Don't think you're not smart because you have a question. Don't let having questions push you back as if you're not ready, you're not good enough, right? And you talk about that, because I thought the importance of asking questions with courage and with openness was really powerful in the book.
Thank you. Yeah, I think everybody has questions, and scientists just spend their time trying to answer them every day, all hours of the day. Maybe not all hours, but
Yeah.
close enough. I grew up with my parents saying, we don't say, I don't know to questions. We'll say, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. And I think that's essentially what scientists do. We have a lot of questions and then we try to figure out creative ways to solve them. And that's exciting. That's an endeavor that I think everybody can relate to.
Sure. I mean, I think this notion that a really good question can be really valuable.
Yeah. I think that's part of, again, that's part of being a scientist, is figuring out what questions are the right questions. Not that there's a right, but that maybe take you more towards that answer.
Oh, yeah.
Than others.
About, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I read Scientific American, right? And they had an anniversary issue. And in that issue, there was a part of the book that a scientist suggested that people just go and mess up all their experiments, just make a mess of it, and then try to work your way back.
Yeah.
Right?
That's what my
because you're
code
going
is.
to learn, so much from that, from making a mistake. And I thought, wow, I wonder if you just, tell more people that.
Yeah.
Get hung up on a, mistake, and all of a sudden, you're frozen.
Yeah, you
Right.
freeze. Exactly. I think one of the things that I had to come to terms with, maybe as a scientist or, as someone interested in science, is I am wrong so much. I get the answer wrong all the time. And it's a very humbling experience. But then when you get it right, it's like, oh, I grew through this. I learned. I evolved. The answer is suddenly, it makes sense for all of these reasons. And that's exciting. That's like a light bulb moment.
Yes.
And those mistakes along the way are part of the process. You iterate until you get it. And I think I certainly have gotten dissuaded during that. I mean, it's defeating in many ways, especially when your code just like doesn't run and you're like, oh my God, like what's going on? But then it works and you get to go from there.
Yeah. So some years ago, I was on the National Advisory Board with the National Society of Black Engineers. It's one of the largest such organizations in the country. And one of the problems we were running into was professors discouraging young people from pursuing engineering in their first year. In fact, when my son was in school at Cal Poly Pomona, the professor said, look to your right and look to your left, only one of you is going to make it.
Horrible.
Right. So what, you have the podium here. So what would you say to the people who do such things as that?
Oh, I have a lot of words. I've experienced that in my life. I went to science camp when I was in 5th grade, which was really cool, and I was a very cool kid. But when I was there, I met an astronomer for the first time, and I was so excited because even at that age, I knew that was something I was really curious about and I wanted to explore. And I ran up to him and I said, I want to be an astronomer when I grow up. And he said, no, you don't. This isn't for you. To a 10-year-old. And I think that's an example of these very explicit messages that people in power give to younger people, especially underrepresented people. And it's incredibly defeating. And when you have those messages compound over time, along with these sort of more insidious messages like, only the girls or only the boys get called up in math class to solve problems. You start to believe in them. I mean, I did. And it's interesting, almost every interview that I've had so far about this book, whenever it's a woman interviewing me, almost every single one has said, I've had that experience happen to me. I wanted to be a mathematician or a physicist or, enter your answer here. And they changed their path because of it. So I think for those who say those things, I don't know if they realize just how harmful those statements are. I mean, like the one with your son who said, only one of you will be here at the end of the year. Not only is that defeating, but that can create a core belief in that person and make them question their worth, where they belong. You can break someone in that. And so I think, educators and mentors and people with privilege and power have a responsibility to, as I said earlier, foster excitement, foster passion, nurture young minds to succeed in whatever they want to succeed in. And those young minds get to tell you what they're curious about. But it's not up to those, in power to dictate what people can and cannot do.
Sure. And I forgot the name of the movie that came out about the African American women who were doing math at NASA. And I think what people learn from that film, and if any read of history, that it's a fiction that men do everything.
Yeah.
Discover everything. Know everything.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the lies that we tell young people. I mean, I certainly was told this when I was asked, who I look up to when I was younger. I could only think of, Albert Einstein, Carl Sagan, who I love, but, men who were researchers and pioneers in physics and astronomy, when really there are incredible women who have also made extraordinary discoveries, and they just aren't publicized in the same ways.
Mae Jemison was the first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
astronaut, yeah.
That representation is so important to let people know that they belong. If they can't see themselves, it's incredibly hard to imagine that you could ever be there.
Right. And don't you think it's a waste of talent?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's when I talk about, why aren't there, more women, more people of color in STEM, I think it's not that people aren't interested. It's that they are actively dissuaded or they're pushed out. And it is a massive waste of talent. And we need those minds. We need that unique perspective and everybody's, different ways of thinking and understanding and viewing the world and experiences to be able to solve complex problems. When you think about COVID-19 and the way that it affects different populations.
Well, there was a woman who did some of the original research on the breakthrough of the approach to that kind of medicine, who was the lowest paid, PhD sitting in a lab somewhere. And it's like, that stuff you were working on, we need that now.
Right.
It was kind of like, oh.
Right. And then you end up having, you create, I mean, I'm speaking now in terms of like the medical field, but there are, treatments that are created that completely don't address certain populations, that aren't available for certain populations because they are only used on men in the research groups. And so it's harmful to everyone involved.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you. So let me go one more step a little deeper, because you do it in a book, and I'm going to let you talk about it the way you want to talk about it, which is managing one's own emotional crises as you work through it. Everybody in the room, let me tell you, you've had them. Okay? You're not excluded. Okay? But you do a really good job of sort of, working your way through and being really open and honest about some things that were challenging to you. But why don't you... I'll let you speak to that in the way that you want to.
Yeah. So for those who haven't read the book, I suffer from pretty severe general anxiety disorder, PTSD. And I have with anxiety since I was a kid. And I think one of the things that I say in the book is that I fell in love with the night sky in part because I loved feeling small. And that was really beneficial to my anxiety, because suddenly I didn't have to worry about all the things that were in my mind because it doesn't matter. And there's something really beautiful in that. I think when you surrender to this notion that the universe is very big and we are, I think I say an exquisite blip in the cosmos. And
Just passing through, honey.
exactly, we're just passing through. And, I said this earlier this week that makes every, person that you interact with, every relationship that you have infinitely more precious. And there's something incredibly comforting in that. I think in terms of the way that I talk about anxiety with science, specifically my journey in physics, is that I felt, and often do still, feel stupid a lot of the time. It's a very, as we just talked about, you get things wrong all the time. And that's hard. And so a lot of my, what I write about is how I deal with that, how I contextualize and make meaning out of the hard things to make the special things and the happy things even more precious.
Yeah. Let me remind you in the audience, if you have questions, so please, write them on the card, and you can bring them up, and I'll read and review those as well if you have any questions. I hate to tell you, I don't have a pen for everyone, so you have to borrow a pen. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I think there's a way in which, and I'll ask you to just think about this, is that really clear thinking, where you get to a point of discovery, right? One needs to be open and clear.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I have a passage in the book where I talk about my journey in hating physics to loving physics. And it was no one tell my advisor, but it was it was an evolution that I didn't know was going to happen. And what I ended up, I think, realizing is I reached this meditative state when I am solving physics problems. And when I lose myself in the research, when I think about what it really is that I'm coding or what I'm thinking about and what the research question is. And that's liberating. That's very, very freeing. And those are the best moments. Those are the moments that make it all worth it.
Sure.
And so I think that for me, in many ways, is physics and astronomy, but it can be anything. I think when you find that avenue of being able to really surrender and be open, as you said, to whatever is happening, you are in a clear state. And it's sort of, it's therapeutic in many ways.
I met a person who said that he can see clearer.
Yeah, I think in my best moments as a physicist, that's exactly what happens. You see all of the things that brought you to this point. You see the way that things are woven together to create a picture that you, I think, see in all clarity. And I think that's every scientist's goal. I think when you want to see all of the different ways that the evidence sort of points to, this one big idea or this one realization.
I want to go back to the size of the universe, and you made some comments earlier about we're made from stardust, right? So when we had Dr. Fracknoy here, and he was going through the James Webb, he pointed out that one of the things they discovered is that the theories about how soon galaxies form from the Big Bang had to be reconfigured, because somewhere deep out there seemed to be one that appeared about 300 million years after the Big Bang, and that wasn't supposed to be there.
Yeah,
you heard this story?
I have, yeah. I think
Can you tell people a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So the James Webb Space Telescope, for those who don't know, is a state-of-the-art telescope that was launched last July, I think. And its job is to sort of see, the farthest things away in our universe. And people who study the early universe, so the farther away you look, the further back in time in the universe you look, because light takes time to travel to us. So we are looking at things as they looked, 13 billion years ago, for example. And so this study that you're referencing, they found that galaxies existed, or they thought they found that galaxies existed far earlier than our models would have predicted. And as far as I know, that I think is maybe not the case. And they are astronomers are actively investigating it. But I think that potentially that first conclusion that a galaxy formed 300 million years after the Big Bang is potentially not true.
Right. Well, the reason I brought that up because I wanted you to give people your idea of, as you're studying this stuff, what do you see that some of the big issues are that you would think it'd be good for us to be thinking about, sort of, as you're studying stuff? What stuff's out there that you think, wow, we should check this out?
Well, I think the easy one is, is there life out there, right? I think everybody at some point in their life has been interested in that question.
Be a big waste of space if there wasn't any, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I think most astronomers, if you talk to them, they'll probably say there is, but we just haven't found it yet. But the question that I am most interested in is my research question, and that's what I'm writing my dissertation on. So for some background, the universe is expanding. We've known that since the 30s, late 20s, early 30s. But what we learned in the late 80s is that the universe isn't just expanding, it's accelerating its expansion. And the stuff that is propelling that expansion is called dark energy.
Oh my God. That is frightening, the very thought of it. Now I feel really, really small. Man.
I know. It's once you start thinking about these things, you're like, oh my God. Yeah, we're just flying along in space. But what's interesting is that we don't know exactly how fast the universe is expanding around us. And so my job is to use exploding stars to try to solve that question, or at least chip away and get closer to answering that question. And what might really blow your mind is that when you look at the early universe, so if we apply our standard models of physics to the earliest parts of the universe, that model predicts a different rate of expansion than what we measure locally.
Ooh.
And so the question is there some different physics going on that we don't have in our standard model of physics to help explain this? Is there something wrong with our methods? Is there some sort of systematic uncertainty that is just showing up and we don't know what it is yet?
Wow.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, you can come back and tell us the answer.
I would happily come back and talk all about it.
In fact, someone told me tell me if this is true now, that if it really is expanding that fast, at some point, the stars that we're seeing now are not going to be visible.
Yeah.
It's going to get...
Yeah, we'll be plunged into eternal darkness.
Oh.
But that's not going to happen for a
We'll be dead by then.
We'll be long gone. And no.
Yeah.
But yeah, the universe is going to, as far as we know, our current models say that it'll continue to expand forever and continue to accelerate that expansion. And so everything will grow further and further apart. We won't see stars. There will be black holes that sort of evaporate, and we'll be left with nothingness.
Wow.
But that makes this current moment infinitely more precious.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Yeah. I mean, I think this we're going back to this, why it's important for people to understand about science, right? Because one thing that we learned from the James Webb discussion is that, well, there's only one Earth in this area. We only have one.
Yes, I think that is...
And all these other planets that are around here, we don't think we can live on any of those.
Yeah, I think there's this notion that oh, we'll just go to another planet, you know, we'll just
Strap on the
escape.
Star Trek and boom,
Right. Yeah. How cool would that be? But I think the reality is probably not. It's our closest planet that might work besides the moon is, because the moon's not a planet, is Mars. And there was an article that I think said it perfectly in the headline: Mars is a hellhole. I mean, nobody wants to live on Mars. It's excruciating. You know, we would live in tunnels underground. We wouldn't be able to go to the surface. I mean, it's not a pleasant way of life. And if you think about, you know, we were talking earlier about the time scales, the distance scales that we're facing when we talk about astronomy. I mean, we're talking light years. So that's the distance that light travels in a year.
Oh, yeah.
And then you start adding those up, and it's like, we're not going to get anywhere anytime soon.
No.
And that's
you'll be a vegetable inside of it.
Exactly. That's right.
Get there, yeah. That's not going to work, yeah.
So I think this is especially important when we face global challenges like climate change. And when we talk about why protecting life on Earth matters, we can't be cavalier about the way that we treat our planet. And I think, you know, Gen Z especially is really rising to that challenge in a beautiful way. And I hope that people, I mean, it's an existential threat and it's a very real threat. And we're not going to have another Earth to just hop to. There's no planet B, I guess is the saying.
Is there a question from the audience? Because I haven't seen one. Okay. Thank you very much. Let me just grab this. Let me have a look at this. Okay. He says, I'm a psychologist who works with clients in astrology charts to give them meaning to their lives. Do you want to say anything about astrology?
That's so cool. Oh man, what do I want to say? I think that I don't know a lot about astrology, to be candid. I think that it plays an incredibly important cultural role in many different cultures. And I'm not going to come in here and say, you know, it's wrong, because I to be honest. Yeah. Right. But I do think, you know, what I can say is that I think it's a very human desire to make meaning out of the universe around us, including the stars. And humans have been doing that for a very long time. And, you know, if that brings comfort or some sense of security, then who am I to say that it's not right?
No, I agree. One other thing I want you to explain to people, because this was explained to us a while ago, but I think you have a way of explaining it as well, which is everything out there is moving at really high rates of speed. And so as soon as you step off of this planet, it's not where you left it.
Yeah, that's actually
you might have a
really
hard
good way
time
to
getting
say it.
back. Can you explain to people why that's true?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to explain this in the best way, but I'll try. You know, we are on the Earth. The Earth is rotating and is also orbiting the sun. And the sun is orbiting the center of our galaxy. And there are many other suns out there that are all moving as well. And so you start to realize that everything is sort of spinning on its axis and rotating and moving through space. And yeah, I mean, when you step off the planet's going to be in a different position than when you get back.
If you can get back.
If you can get back, right? Exactly. So yeah, it's an interesting thought for sure.
Yeah, because I think there's a misnomer that people think that it's right there, and so you can just like fly to it and then turn around and come back. And that's not exactly true, is it?
No, especially because space-time itself is moving. And so not only are the objects in space moving, but space itself is moving. And then you start to think, what is anything real? But, you know, I think the image of a static universe is historical. I mean, when we used to think that the Earth was the center of our solar system, and we used to think that, I don't know, the sun didn't move, or, whatever it is, there are these pictures that we paint to understand what's around us, because that's the information that we have, and that's how we can contextualize and understand these things. But in reality, and I think I say this, it's actually like the first couple pages of the book, we don't know the full picture a lot of the time. And so perception, we have to acknowledge that what we see is what we perceive. Mm-hmm. And what is the objective reality is something that science helps uncover.
Yes. So since you raised astrology, I'm going to throw one more of the sort of curveballs that we get occasionally, which is the great meteor strike that will, I guess it wiped out the dinosaurs.
Oh,
But is there some likelihood that we could have another such event? What do you think?
I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I think that, it's a concern. But it's also like, as far as I know, governmental agencies like NASA that's part of what they do is to try to figure out how to, move those away from the Earth. I don't know how effective it is. Yeah, right. I don't know how effective it is, but I guess we'll see.
The thing I heard about this, and you can see, I think this is true, that one of the problems is that sometimes the underside of the Earth, right, like where the South Pole all down in there, that we're not actually looking down there.
Wait, what do you mean?
That whatever our telescopes are, scanning, where a meteor may come from, right? That we're not looking 360 degrees. That there's some parts of the space of outer space that we're actually not observing. And something could come from there.
Well, the Earth
because
rotates,
we're not looking.
So.
And it can come from anywhere, right?
Right. No, you're right. But I mean, telescopes can see a portion of the sky.
Yeah.
But there are telescopes all over the world. And so you can start to build out a full picture of the sky.
But currently, as I understand it, there's some gaps in.
Well, then hopefully it doesn't come from there.
I'm just thinking all those other PhD students that got to come behind.
Yeah, I'll give an undergrad that research project.
Young lady, you need to get and start looking on the dark side over there and see if there's anything coming. That'd be helpful. Okay. All right. Anything else that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with this audience, just from the wonderful? There's so many good things in the book, and I don't want to be a spoil sport here, but there's other things that you think that you want to share with people. Please do, because I've asked you a bunch of tough questions.
You've asked great questions. I don't think I have anything. Maybe can I just read a quick small passage?
Please do.
Is that allowed? Okay. Do we want science or do we want...
It's up to you. It's your ticket.
All right. Well, since my advisor is here, I'm going to talk about supernova because that's what I study.
Wonderful. Oh, lovely.
So this is the beginning of chapter 7. It's called Exploding Stars. In a never-ending sea of black, beacons of starlight tether us to the cosmos. But it is when stars cataclysmically explode that the brightest lights of our universe get lit. While stars about the size of the sun fizzle out into white dwarfs at the ends of their lives, fading into darkness as empty shells of themselves, more massive stars undergo a different evolution, one that ends with their explosion. We are the stuff of stars. The oxygen we breathe, the nitrogen in our DNA, the iron in our red blood cells, the calcium in our bones, and the carbon in our cells were once formed in the cores of stars. Without supernova, there would be no you, no me, no dancing, no breathing, no words on this page, no leaves blowing in the wind, no joy and no heartbreak, no thoughts and no love. There would be no light. Instead, because these stars die, the universe is alive.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Serafina El-Badji. Man, wonderful program.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the book. Oh, wait a minute.
Oh.
Someone, the YouTuber people have come in.
Oh,
Okay.
boy.
All right. We're not going to Okay. So, oh, you got one too? Okay, there we go.
We're not done. Okay.
Okay. There you go. So they're pulling you back in. Okay. So this question is, if you look, and I kind of talked on this about what big questions is astronomy facing right now. You talked about dark energy. We talked about, in fact, there's an experiment, I guess, where these lasers are crossing and there's some wave that comes through the universe. So what are these other sort of challenging questions that you say that sitting in the middle of astronomy right now?
Yeah, I think what you were just referencing, gravitational waves.
Yes.
So when black holes collide, or when a neutron star and a black hole collides, it creates this sort of cataclysmic thing that sends out gravitational waves, which are ripples in space-time, and we can detect them here on Earth. So that's really cool and exciting, and also not what I study, but other very smart people look into it.
Some of them women, by the way.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the questions that brought me to astronomy are honestly part of the reason why I think astronomy is relatable to everyone. You know, there are these questions that face humankind and really, I think, make us consider the human condition, which is, are we alone? How did the universe get here? What is the fate of the universe? You know, these big, big questions. And yes, some of them are philosophical, but some of them are very scientific. And I think that, you know, some of the brightest minds are tasked with answering these questions.
Right. This is an interesting question. I don't really know the answer to this, but you probably can work this one through.
I don't know.
No.
We'll see.
With the universe expanding, are the bodies right around us, the moon and Mars, are they getting closer to us or further away?
Yeah. So what's interesting and important to remember about the universe expanding is that happens on the grandest scales of the universe. So galaxy clusters. So clusters of galaxies which are filled with, you know, hundreds of thousands of stars. That's the stuff between which space-time is expanding. But gravity is paramount and the most important thing on the local scales. So the smallest scales, like the Earth and the moon and the sun.
Okay, because actually the moon is actually getting closer to us by about something like a quarter of an inch every year or so, right?
Yeah, I actually do think that's right. Yeah. I interned at an observatory where, let me tell you, one of the weirdest things I've ever witnessed is out of this observatory on the hill, this giant green laser was just pointing at the moon.
Yes.
And everyone around was like, are there aliens? Like, what's going on? And it was measuring the distance of the moon by measuring how long the light takes to hit the moon and back. It was able to measure the distance. They're tracking that over time to see how that distance is changing.
Right. And I guess, according to some people, is that the moon was formed in the early formation of the Earth, right? When some of the material that didn't form here just kind of spun off, and in fact, the stuff that's flying around the bands in Saturn are the same thing. It's this leftover planetary stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, as far as I understand, one of the theories about how the moon was formed is basically this object collided with the Earth. And then
broke off a piece, huh?
Exactly, and then got gravitationally bound. Huh? Yeah, right, exactly. We're all moving, yeah, including that.
Good. Yeah, great. We don't want to be around for anything like that to happen. Yeah. Okay, last question here. The person says, well, you're talking about sort of dark matter expanding the universe and dark energy. Dark energy, yeah. So is there anything else that might be affecting it, or we just don't know? What's the thought?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially, that type of question is exactly what my research question and what, you know, that field of research is interested in exploring is, you know, we think dark energy is real, but, you know, are we not understanding or seeing something that's in the standard model of physics that could potentially explain what we're seeing? I think the evidence, as far as I know, is overwhelmingly pointing to dark energy being real. It explains a lot of things about the composition of the universe. how the universe is evolving. But that said, I mean, scientists have been wrong a lot of the time, and we think we know one thing, and then all of a sudden we get some new data and we learn something different. So I would say, there are potentially other explanations, but right now with our current data and our current analysis, dark energy is the answer.
Well, here's to learning new things. Thank you again. All right.
2 rounds of applause. Wow.
This concludes this evening's program in the Commonwealth Club. Thank you all for coming.